I know who I am. I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Hey! We're recording the podcast! Shut up!
Good morning to you wherever you are, because it is Bear for
January 12th.
2024. My name is Burnie Burns. With me, sitting right over there, fresh from her AI-generated comedy special, Ashley Burns. How are you doing?
Yeah, working for the weekend.
Rave reviews, man.
Thanks. I'm so glad that my AI generated comedy special met expectation.
Yeah, you've been dead for years, so we think we're all shocked by that.
Look, it's a big comeback.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. We're talking about the George Carlin, in quotes. I don't know if you can feel me doing air quotes through the microphone here, but the George Carlin AI generated comedy special that came out. But first we have this is Friday. So before we head into the weekend, we've got to do our follow-ups for little things that we started to talk about and either dropped or things that we got wrong. So it's our follow-up Friday.
Or FUF, for sure.
First follow-up of the week, which was I talked about Ashley having this uncanny ability to walk into me listening to audiobooks at the moment that it turns from some heady sci-fi into some teenager sex fantasy.
Every time.
I think I mischaracterized too the 3-body problem version of that. It wasn't overtly sexual. It was just the most, what do they call that? Mary Sue, overly it was, almost like a love bomb kind of a thing.
Yeah, it was always like really weird, and like just the way that this main character saw this particular girl. I was like, this is very strange.
Yeah, it might have been a cultural thing, but it just felt like a maturity thing more than anything else.
A little bit, yeah.
I'll go through really quickly. Following up on Bitcoin, one of the things you'll always hear in the cycle when cryptocurrency is doing well is all these anecdotes that make it seem like, oh, this is an approachable, cool thing. The Bitcoin pizza story, I forgot to bring up yesterday. One of my favorite facts about that, there's a guy who spent 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 pizzas back in 2011. He did that when Bitcoin was worth nothing. He got someone to buy him 2 pizzas in exchange for 10,000 Bitcoin. And that story comes up all the time.
Every single time Bitcoin goes on a run.
And everyone's like, oh, that poor guy, what a sucker and all that. Just so you know, that guy is the guy who worked on the team that developed GPUs to be able to mine Bitcoin. So when you can't buy a video card like an RTX 3000 or whatever, that's the guy. So I'm pretty sure he's doing okay.
And also, we don't need to feel sorry for him.
Yeah, and just quick follow-up here on the rest of the Bitcoin stuff. One of the most common adages in investing is buy the rumor, sell the news. So you know when there's the whispers that something's about to happen, buy it then, and you always wonder, why is this big announcement happening with this company? Like they had a profitable quarter and their stock went down. It's because people sold the news. They bought knowing it would go up. Then when they announced it, they sold it. That didn't happen with the Bitcoin ETF.
No, it had something else weird happen, though, is someone hacked the SEC Twitter account before the announcement, before the approval, and said it was approved. And then it had a spike, not actually as big a spike as I thought. I think it spiked to 48 from 45, which is a spike. And, if you have a lot of Bitcoin, would make a significant difference, but not as much as you might think that kind of announcement would make. And then it went back down. Got approved, and didn't come back up. Well, I kind of found strange.
So they had the fake news before the actual news. They had the fake announcement. Yeah. And I read that Bitcoin's daughter was very upset about that fake announcement. She had opinions about it.
It's very disrespectful.
And someone asked me too, they said, why are you only talking about the financial aspects of cryptocurrency? Don't you want to talk about use cases? First of all, no, because we're not, if you beat people over the head with crypto stuff in a podcast, they'll tune out really quickly. And secondly, the news right now is about the ETF, which is the financial aspect. So that's it. So that's our done, wrapped up on crypto for the week. Yeah. Other news, you told me that Carrie Coon got cast in White Lotus.
Yes. So earlier this week, talked about how she was in talks to potentially join. They announced some other casting decisions. Now she has officially joined the cast. So you, congratulations, are now a White Lotus fan.
I'm now apparently a White Lotus fan. Do I have to go back and watch season 1 and season 2?
I think the seasons are self-contained. I know that the second season, it had one character come across, Jennifer Coolidge. I think that's her name, Stifler's mom. But I think the stories were completely different.
correct.
And I don't believe she is in White Lotus season 3. I think it's not quite Fargo-ish, but kind of Fargo-ish, where each season it tells its own story.
Do you ever get different franchises mixed up in your head, like they're intertwined?
Oh, constantly.
I have this right now. The White Lotus franchise is intertwined with me with the Knives Out franchise. I don't know why.
Interesting.
Because it has like all-star casts and, people coming in, but they're not there for the whole franchise. They're just there for iterations and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I get that. And also because the second Knives Out was on an island. And the first White Lotus season, I think the second one was in Italy, but the first White Lotus season was like Mexican resort. So very similar visual aesthetic, probably.
Well, I cannot wait to watch Carrie Coon and Knives Out. It's going to be great. All right. Moving on to more current stuff. So we've been hinting at it in our earlier conversations today, but there was a hour-long comedy special released featuring an AI comedian in the style of George Carlin. How do we say these things?
I don't even know how. It's like, how do you frame something like that properly? It's really weird. Like, it's AI, but AI still has to be guided by a human hand at this point, but it's using George Carlin's voice. And one of the things that I found really weird about this is this comedy special was called I'm Glad I'm Dead.
Yes.
Which is like, oh, damn, dude. Jesus. I mean, well, yes, that does seem like a very George Carlin style of humor.
Did you listen to a lot of George Carlin?
I listened to like a bit here and there. I listened to like a couple different bits at different times, but I wouldn't say I've like sat down and watched an entire special in one go.
He, really popular guy, but also falls in that category of a comedian's comedian. Sometimes those comedians don't do very well, but George Carlin was very successful. But there are certain comedians that comedians absolutely adore. Like an Andy Kaufman, even like more modern, Norm Macdonald, Colin Quinn, but George Carlin was one of the comedians, Richard Pryor, another one. George Carlin was one that did really, really, really well, I think. Not as well as like Richard Pryor, but he was really well known. Going back and forth between the US and Scotland, it's really interesting what is considered to be a celebrity in the US versus who is a celebrity in the UK. And I think a really good example of that where we're from is Billy Connolly. Like, Billy Connolly was a popular-ish comedian, I think, in the US. I say was, but still is. He's still kicking. He's 81. Just won a BAFTA. If you say Billy Connolly around here, like, people like start wiping a tear out of their eye.
Really?
Oh gosh, yeah, they adore Billy Connolly in this area in particular. Yeah. And actually, there's an association there because Billy Connolly was in the same group with like Whoopi Goldberg, George Carlin. They would always do stuff together. Billy Crystal. They did like a lot of charity comedy events together. Anyway, this podcast, the Dudesy podcast, and I'm going to read an article here from Deadline. This is by Greg Evans. Thank you for having an easy to pronounce name, Mr. Evans. He wrote an article about George Carlin's daughter responding to it, but explained essentially what the Dudesy podcast is. And this is from his article. Dudesy is an AI-generated podcast, quote, host, in which it learns from existing data to generate and speak on a range of topics. A weekly Dudesy podcast and YouTube show is co-hosted by actual humans Will Sasso and Chad Kultgen, who do not appear on the new Carlin special. Although I did see shorts promoting it where Will Sasso was reacting to clips from the podcast. And I do think it's interesting that...
From the podcast or from the special?
From the special. They were on their podcast set listening to clips, and that was what the YouTube short. There seems to be, we're analyzing all this stuff right now, the magic formula for podcasts is a comedian who's got a stand-up career, but then also they have these little clips that they put on YouTube shorts. We're trying to be careful about that kind of stuff because one thing else I've noticed is that if a YouTube short gets really popular, suddenly that becomes the whole voice of the podcast. Like they try to recreate whatever viral moment that was. And, it's easy to do that because, you tend to chase the attention and the numbers, or just the audience starts to influence what the content is. But that does seem to be the formula these days.
Sure. I understand completely. However, I don't really want to put on makeup in the morning.
Let me ask you this. How did you hear about this if you didn't see it through that short?
I think it came up on my Reddit feed.
Okay.
and it was about his daughter's response, which was I thought much more measured than my response would have been if someone basically deepfaked my dad and did a comedy special called "I'm Glad I'm Dead."
So let me ask you that. Just let's take the AI component out of it in general. There is the dead person and now the surviving estate. A lot of the artist's work lives on. It gets exploited in different ways from a business perspective. Then, of course, we've seen people's likeness and image also, which is part of their work, I guess. You know, the image and the icon that they built up gets then exploited. The first time I remember that happening, there was a big controversy over a Dirt Devil commercial that featured the dancer Fred Astaire. He was dancing around and sweeping up with a Dirt Devil.
Was this in like 1985? When was this commercial?
He died in 89, and I think it was the mid 90s. Maybe I want to say 1997.
That's so strange.
Yeah. So it's a while ago. That's over 20 years ago now. 25 years ago.
I guess deepfakes have been around a while.
Well, once they had technology where they could insert people into things. I mean, even Forrest Gump, they used footage and put Forrest Gump shaking hands with Kennedy. And they used Kennedy's image, a very, very public figure. You were talking about
the first thing I remember being like a really big "this person's dead, what are you doing" controversy was the Tupac hologram show. And that was a huge thing. And now you've got bands that aren't dead doing hologram shows. The ABBA and Kiss just recently opened one or announced one that they're doing in, I think, Las Vegas. And it's like, but I have no illusions that those shows will suddenly end when one of the members participating in the show as, Avatar dies.
Right. Well, definitely not with Kiss because they've already replaced 2 of their members. Kiss has always fallen that it's an interesting space where you have like super cool, outside the system guys, rockers, but they just sell everything. Like, yeah, Kiss at one point even sold coffins to their fans.
I mean, that seems kind of on brand. But that is about as commercial as you get.
I would not be surprised at all if Kiss saw the success that ABBA had with their London show and just said, okay, we're doing that too.
I mean, I will from a purely business standpoint, I'll be curious to see how it goes because ABBA's always been kind of a unique animal in that they also have the Mamma Mia musical with something that seems like it shouldn't have worked but did.
Yeah, and they're all alive, right? And so this is first party use of that where they can say like we want to do that. There's something about the ABBA one that bothers me. It's doing very well. We'll link some articles you can read about the success of the show. I think it was generating at one point, $2 or $3 million a week for the London show?
Not bad. It's got a long way to go, though, to make up for the technology required to run the show, for the technology development.
It's basically the band ABBA. They have a show in London where it's their holographic avatars on stage performing. The only issue that I really have with that is that one of the motivations for them doing it is they want their fans to remember them as they were younger,
Right. Well, I mean, they haven't performed live in decades.
Yeah.
Since 81.
When was the last ABBA album?
Also in the 80s.
Was it really?
They haven't done any new music releases in also decades.
Voyage is the 9th album by the Swedish pop group ABBA, released 5th of November, 2021. Might feel like decades ago, but last album here, 1981.
Voyage is the show.
Oh, maybe they made an album for the show as well. That would make sense to put out a new album along with the show. Not everyone's going to travel to London to see it. Just last week we were talking about Steamboat Willie, right? And so we're talking about a fictional character that enters the public domain. People are the same way, right? I mean,
do people enter the public domain? I
mean,
they shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like it would be an estate thing, and that characters would be different than people. And even material can be different. I know the author, Terry Pratchett, he had, I think, a lot of his work destroyed when he passed away because he didn't want people messing with it and re-releasing stuff.
When you say his work, you mean his unpublished work? Or?
Yes.
Really interesting,
yes.
Yeah.
And I think his daughter, Rihanna Pratchett, who actually does a lot of video game writing, let that nerd flag fly, girl. She's been very vocal on his behalf.
I mean, part of me says, as a parent, look, if I'm dead and you personally have the ability to, my kids, I mean, if you would have the ability to exploit my image in some way that would help you guys, I mean, that's what we do while we're living, and if I'm dead, I guess the legacy matters, but does it really matter to you if you're gone? This is a weird case, obviously, because it's clearly not the daughter involved with this. This is someone outside of that. Another first party one I thought that was interesting. Do you remember when Bruce Willis it was first becoming clear that he was going to retire because he was suffering from aphasia?
Yes, I do remember that.
There was he was in a Russian commercial where they just did face replacement and put him over it. And then there was this big rumor at the time that he had sold his likeness to be used by AI companies so he could live in perpetuity and his career could continue beyond his ability to perform.
Yeah, I think I remember that. But that
was debunked.
I was going to say
debunked.
that ended up being not true, right?
But why would that be a thing that he couldn't do? There was actually a movie back from early 2010s called The Congress. It's Robin Wright's in it. I want to go back and watch it because it was really trippy part of it. But the main conceit of the movie was an actress who was getting older and sold her rights to clone her to be in as many movies as possible. And then I think it's the adventures of that digital clone that came from the original person, living forever, essentially.
I wonder if there was any element of that had the Hollywood executives going, that led to so much issue with the strikes this year.
Yeah, and this AI stuff is...
Last year.
Absolutely. Well, we just saw the SAG gave up ground to the video game companies.
Yeah, so that was an interesting thing this week that we didn't really talk about, which was just that SAG signed with for the video game companies to allow AI generated voices.
Right,
and all the voice actors are saying none of us approved this, none of us voted for this. What are you doing? And so there's a bit of dissension in the SAG ranks right now.
Well, that dissension exists, and I don't think many people are aware of it within SAG. After strike is over and we struck the deal, the members of SAG-AFTRA we had to vote on the contract. And there were a lot of people who didn't want to vote for the contract because of, the AI clauses that still existed within the contract, that they weren't protective enough. But you take one of the big things in that was background actors. The studios wanted to take a background actor's one-day performance and then copy them infinitely for the rest of time. So a background actor would get 1 day of work.
They wanted to basically be able to scan them and turn them into a 3D character that then they could insert into whatever movies in whatever way they wanted in perpetuity, right?
And I absolutely believe that person should be protected. But I also realize 5 years from now, they just won't even give them the 1 day of work. They'll just generate a person in the background. And that'll be the way around that fence. It's like a door with no walls on either side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
And that's just the way technology works. And it's what we're all suffering with right now. So this George Carlin thing, it's an interesting discussion. I think at a higher level, it's now people are saying, is it just Will Sasso doing an impression? Is that what this is? Is this a hoax? Is it a stunt? But that's really what all of this brings about, is what is going to happen with what is real and what is not. And will we even figure it out? But it did remind me of a crazy copyright public domain thing that lives in Hollywood lore. It's the movie Night of the Living Dead. How appropriate is that for this? Back in the day, they changed the movie's name from Night of the Flesh Eaters. But when they changed the name of the movie, they didn't put the copyright statement on the new prints. So the moment Night of the Living Dead came out, it instantly entered the public domain and anyone could make copies of it. And George Romero lost control of that property. And you think about all the things that inspired over the years, especially the huge zombie run we've been in the last 5 years. Crazy to think about. All right. Well, that does it for us. Friday, January 12th. We will be back to talk to you on Monday. We hope you'll be here as well. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye.